The Filipino sensation, the eight-time, eight-division world champion, Manny Pacquiao is returning to the sport of boxing, and we don't really know why, but he's going to be fighting in this July, against Mario Barrios at 147 for the WBC title. And it's kind of crazy because ultimately, why would Manny get to skip the line? Because there are other 147 contenders out there, obviously, and he kind of just gets to jump in front of them all and get a title shot. And I guess that's just what comes along with being a legend in the sport of boxing. Like I said, an 8-division world champion, a record that'll never be touched again. But it's just, weird to see Manny back and really competing at the highest level, because if you're talking about world champions, you got one in Mario Barrios, and he's probably the easiest world champion to beat at 147. Let's be real. I think Manny, if he were to have a chance against any fighter at 147, it would probably be Mario Barrios. But still, I think Barrios is still too young for Pacquiao. I mean, Pacquiao's like 46, so to expect him to go in there after never really competing ever since that Ugas fight. He's had some exhibitions, but doesn't really train for them. You could clearly tell by his physique, and I mean that respectfully to Manny, but he's older now. He's 46. He's an old man basically, and there's no need for him. He's already accomplished everything there is in the sport of boxing. But like I say, boxers who have kind of made this life from rags to riches sometimes have a difficult time of hanging up the gloves, because that's what's ultimately put themselves in such a great position. That's their purpose in life. So when you tell them to stop boxing, Manny doesn't know what to do with that. He has other obligations like being a dad, a congressman and a politician in the Philippines, but he feels like he can juggle it all, and I salute Manny Pacquiao. But it could be a dangerous outcome because he keeps pushing the waters. It was one thing to be like in your 40s and wanting to fight Errol Spence. That was crazy enough. And then fighting your Dennis Ugas, not getting the outcome you wanted, taking some punishment in that fight. But, just wanting to get back into the ring at 46 is crazy when you have all the money in the world. You've done everything there is to do in the sport of boxing. You fought everybody. What does Mario Barrios really do for you? But I think it's just all about, proving something to himself and showing that he can still compete at 46 and against the best. I think he really wants to test himself. He doesn't really care what we think. He's going to do whatever, he thinks is going to satisfy him mentally and as a competitor, because I feel like as competitors they never really die. You look at Floyd, he's still doing exhibitions, still talking about how he's the best, even how he beat anybody who's still active right now. These guys don't ever really lose that killer instinct or that mentality where they're trying to compete with others. And I think that's what Manny's doing, and he doesn't only want to talk about it, he doesn't only want to pontificate about it, he also wants to find out what's actually going to happen if he were to step back into the ring at his age of 46 years old. And against Mario Barrios, I don't know. I think Barrios, he's not the best 147 pounder out there. He's no Boots Ennis, obviously. We know that. He's no Stan Jonas or Brian Norman, but Barrios is still a solid 147 pounder. And I feel like it could still be, and it still is, a really dangerous fight for Manny. Manny has still a good chance in my opinion, because like I said, if there's a beatable 147 pound champion right now, it's probably Mario Barrios for Pacquiao. But I don't know. I think it's a 50-50 fight. If anything, he might have some tricks that he might be able to pull out, but Barrios is in great shape. He's tall and, rangy. I don't know how Pacquiao would get, be able to really close that distance, because Barrios, like I said, is really tall. Tank was able to do it, but Tank was, in his prime basically, and he still is in his prime. But you're talking about a guy like Manny who's 46 years old. I don't expect him to have the same stamina, the same punching power, or the same fast hands that he's had. Throwing 6 to 7 punch combinations, I don't think that's anything that Manny's going to be able to do again. And, he might be able to win. Who knows, but for me, I don't see the purpose in Manny fighting anymore, but, I'll watch it for sure. I'm a big Pacquiao fan, so I would love to see Manny in the ring, I guess, if he does end up fighting. But if not, perfectly fine with me. He should be enjoying his family. But that's the rumor. That's what I'm hearing and from my sources, that Pacquiao and Barrios are going to be getting it on, according to Mauricio Suleiman, the president of the WBC. So if it goes down, it goes down. I got to say that's a 50-50 fight. I'm I'm gonna rock with Pacquiao and see what happens, but not an easy fight at all, but probably the most beatable fighter at 147. But let me know in the comments down below why you guys think Pacquiao's returning to the sport. That's my opinion and thoughts and breakdown on it. But thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next Nabs Boxing video. Peace.